He cornered her inside Windsor Castle between two archival cabinets deep in the royal preservation wing. No screaming, no warning, just one sentence. "It won't hurt if you stay quiet." The only person who heard it, a royal guard posted just 3 steps away, who didn't wait for permission. He stepped between the princess and Camilla's son, and when the queen tried to shut him down, what the guard said next shattered her control in front of every staff member in the corridor. But before we show you the exact second Charlotte's voice broke, and the one sentence that triggered the royal lockdown, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Hit like, tap subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon, because this one starts with a whisper and ends with a guard who didn't wait to be told. The wardrobe preservation wing was one of the quietest places in Windsor Castle. So still, in fact, that even footsteps seemed to hesitate before crossing its threshold. The temperature was always cool here, a degree lower than the rest of the estate to protect the historic fabrics. A low mechanical hum vibrated constantly from the preservation units lining the walls, blending with the faint rustle of archival sheets that hung over centuries-old garments. The air smelled faintly of cedar and linen, with a sharp trace of metallic, cold from the climate regulators. Sergeant Rowan Halberg stood at his assigned post at the entrance, boots anchored along the seam of the marble floor. His scarlet tunic caught the low-filtered light, and the tall black bearskin hat of the royal guard cast a long shadow down the narrow aisle. He didn't move, he barely breathed. This wing, the one containing the late Queen's coronation robe, the centuries-old mantles, dozens of preserved capes, was more restricted than many ceremonial chambers. Only a handful of royals were regularly permitted entry. Princess Charlotte was one of them. She entered with a wardrobe preservation specialist by her side. The soft shape of a folded ceremonial cape sample held tightly against her chest. The specialist guided her past Rowan with a polite nod, heading toward the far aisle where the children's ceremonial attire was kept. Rowan noticed the princess's steps slowing even before she reached the first row of cabinets. Charlotte kept looking over her shoulder. Not obviously, not enough for the specialist to question it, but Rowan saw it. The subtle tightening at the corners of her eyes, the way her small hands compressed the fabric sample so firmly the folds trembled, the way her shoulders rose when a distant sound echoed down the corridor. Her breathing changed too, barely, but enough for a man trained to watch for shifts in a battlefield to recognize discomfort brewing beneath a polite exterior. He tracked the movement of her gaze without turning his head. She wasn't looking at any garment. She wasn't distracted by the space or the cold or the preservation lights. She was checking the doorway again and again. Rowan didn't speak. It wasn't his place. But the instinct that lived in his spine, the same instinct that kept him alive in Helmond, slid awake with slow precision. Something was off, not loud, not obvious, but threaded through the air like a warning. The wardrobe specialist reached an archival cabinet and unlocked it, pulling out a long velvet garment wrapped in muslin. "This one belonged to Queen Alexandra," she said cheerfully. "The cut is similar to what we'll need for the procession rehearsal. Would you like to try the length, Mom?" Charlotte didn't answer at first. Her eyes were still fixed on the doorway, Rowan guarded. She swallowed once, the movement tight. "Can we just stay here?" She whispered to the specialist. The woman blinked, confused. "Of course, Mom. Whatever you prefer." But Rowan understood. Charlotte wasn't choosing a cape. She was choosing distance, and the wardrobe wing suddenly felt colder than ever. The wardrobe preservation wing had rules, strict ones. Every guard in Windsor knew them by heart. No unexpected entries, no unlogged pass roughs. No wandering civilians, no matter their relation to the crown. So when Rowan heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the corridor, the end that required authorization, his attention sharpened before he even turned his head. The wardrobe specialist didn't notice. Charlotte did. Her spine went rigid, as if her body recognized the rhythm of those approaching steps long before her mind allowed her to react. She clutched the folded cape sample against her chest, pulling it higher, shielding herself with fabric from a century she couldn't possibly understand, but instinctively sought protection behind. The footsteps grew clearer, measured, confident, not hurried. A man who believed he belonged everywhere. Thomas Parker B.S. appeared from the narrow juncture between preservation rows, his hands tucked casually into his tailored coat, expression arranged in polite neutrality. He shouldn't have been there, not without clearance, but he carried himself as though the wing had been built around him. Both the specialist and Charlotte startled. Rowan did not. Thomas smiled as if arriving by invitation. "Ah, there you are," he said lightly, directing the words toward Charlotte as though she'd been waiting for him. "Your grandmother thought I should pop down and advise on fabric continuity for the year cycle ceremonies." Fabric continuity in the most restricted textile wing in the palace. A weaker guard might have hesitated. Rowan did not. "Sir," he said, tone flat and professional, "access to the wardrobe preservation wing requires notice and a logged escort. May I ask who cleared your entry?" Thomas didn't look at Rowan, not even once. He kept his attention fixed on Charlotte, who was attempting to make herself as small as possible beside the archival cabinet. "Oh, Sergeant," Thomas replied with a dry laugh. "These are family matters. Protocol bends for practicality. Surely you understand that. Protocol did not bend in this wing. Not for practicality, not for convenience, and certainly not for Camilla's son." But Rowan held his silence, assessing, repositioning subtly, so his body was now angled more directly between Charlotte and Thomas. Charlotte noticed the shift. Her grip on the fabric tightened. Thomas took a step closer, ignoring the specialist entirely. The narrow corridor forced Charlotte backward, not because she moved, but because his presence consumed space with practiced confidence. Her back met the cool metal of the archival cabinet. She didn't flinch dramatically. It was smaller than that, a tiny inhale, a stiffening, a girl trying not to be noticed while being noticed too much. Thomas's smile widened as he approached. "No need to look so startled," he said, voice dropping into a coaxing softness. "I'm only here to help." Charlotte pressed the cape sample against her chest, like a shield, fingers trembling against the velvet. Rowan saw everything, every micro movement, every shift in breathing, every instinctive recoil that no child should ever exhibit. Something was wrong, not loud, not obvious, but written through her posture as clearly as ink on paper. And Rowan Hellberg had survived too many war zones to ignore a silence that screamed this loudly. The wardrobe specialist stepped away, and her soft-soled shoes barely audible as she disappeared deeper into the preservation corridor. Somewhere down the row, a rolling ladder shifted gently against a wall of glass cabinets. The sound echoed faintly like metal breathing. Charlotte was left standing in the center aisle, holding the velvet bundle to her chest like armor. The space around her narrowed. Tall archival cabinets forming a passage barely wide enough for two people side by side. Dim museum-style lighting bathed the corridor in soft shadow, casting long streaks across the polished floor. And Thomas was still there. Rowan hadn't moved, not fully, but his stance had adjusted just enough. Not aggressive, not alert, just quietly poised to intervene. Thomas didn't acknowledge it. He stepped forward 2 small paces, deliberate, measured. Charlotte's back brushed the chilled surface of a display case, holding ceremonial gloves from the reign of George VI. The air here was several degrees cooler than the rest of the castle, but the flush of heat in her face contrasted sharply with the cold glass behind her. She didn't speak, didn't protest, she simply went still. Thomas lowered his voice so low it barely traveled a foot in any direction. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. He leaned down, lips near her ear, and whispered, "It won't hurt if you stay quiet." Rowan heard it. He didn't need to hear it again. He didn't need clarification. There were only 7 words, but they sliced through the air like a wire drawn tight across a throat. Charlotte didn't react at first. Not visibly, not loudly. Her eyes didn't blink. Her fingers didn't move, but her chest stopped rising for 2 full seconds. Then came the breath inward, sharp, constricted, and then her small frame began to curl slightly like she was folding inward to disappear. Thomas pulled back slowly, still wearing the smile of a man who believed what he just said was clever, innocent, untraceable. Rowan moved, not in a burst, not in anger, but with the deadly control of someone whose hands had once steadied a weapon, while a child screamed on the other side of a blast wall. 3 steps forward, position exact, voice cold and unmistakable. "Sir, step away from the princess." Thomas blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." Rowan didn't repeat it, didn't raise his voice, but the way he stood, the way his tall black bare skin scraped the ceiling lamps, the way his boots locked at perfect angle reminded everyone that guards weren't just for show. Charlotte exhaled through her nose just once, a trembling, barely audible breath, and behind Rowan's stillness, something invisible had already shifted. The castle was no longer pretending not to hear. "Sir, step away from the princess now." Rowan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the kind of command that came from somewhere deeper than training, from a place forged in forward operating bases, in midnight clearances in the space between instinct and duty. The tone didn't ask, it didn't suggest, it told. Thomas straightened with mock confusion, one hand still resting near the shelf behind Charlotte. "Sergeant Halberg," he said, chuckling softly, "let's not be dramatic. I was merely reassuring her." She looked nervous. "That's all." Rowan didn't answer. He stepped forward again, one deliberate movement, until his full frame occupied the corridor space. His scarlet tunic filled the aisle. The tall black bare skin brushed the top of the overhead light rail. Between him and Charlotte now stood a wall of regulation, of stillness, of absolute refusal. Thomas's smirk faltered. "Is there an issue?" he asked, tone sharpened. Rowan didn't take his eyes off him. "The princess is under minor safeguarding status. You approached her without clearance in a restricted wing and used language deemed coercive." Thomas scoffed. "You're twisting this. She's 10. You think she doesn't mishaar things." He glanced toward the wardrobe assistant, who was still down the corridor, now watching the interaction nervously with a bundle of fabric in her hands. "She gets nervous around the old capes, doesn't she? The lights are dim. Who wouldn't be unsettled?" Charlotte hadn't spoken since the whisper. She stood behind Rowan, nearly against the archival cabinet. Her hands still held the velvet sample, but her grip had loosened, not relaxed, just resigned, like someone waiting to be dismissed again. Rowan tapped his shoulder mic once. Preservation wing. Immediate request for safeguarding separation. Protocol Echo 2 active. Restricted corridor, 1 minor, 1 adult. Witnessed phrase confirmed. His voice was even, but the code alone caused a stir. The assistant at the far end of the wing lowered her bundle onto the floor. Thomas's expression darkened. "You're calling this a safeguarding breach based on what?" Rowan finally looked at him fully directly. "I heard you. Thomas's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Rowan adjusted his stance, his boots anchoring with a faint shift on the stone. The air had changed, charged with something dense and non-negotiable. Charlotte hadn't moved from her spot, but now her eyes lifted slightly to look at the back of the guard who'd stepped in front of her. He hadn't asked her what happened, hadn't waited for permission, hadn't required explanation. He'd heard, and that was enough. Down the hallway, a pair of aides froze mid-step as they noticed the change in atmosphere. One of them reached discreetly for their comms. The silence was breaking, and the wardrobe wing had just become the center of the palace. The echo of the guard's radio still hung in the air when a second sound cut across the corridor, heels striking polished stone at an urgent pace. Queen Camilla appeared at the mouth of the preservation wing, flanked by a preservation aide and her personal secretary, lips already pursed in outrage before she reached them. Her coat was still open from a prior engagement, and a pair of thin cream gloves dangled from one hand. "What is going on here?" she snapped. "Why am I being told a guard is shouting in the textile corridor?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He was still standing between Thomas and Charlotte, who had not moved an inch from her place by the archival cabinet. Her hands remained clutched to the velvet cape like it was the last thing tethering her. Camilla's gaze shifted between them quickly. "Charlotte, what is the matter with you? Why are you causing a disruption in a containment zone?" Rowan's voice came calm, even. "Mom, the minor has expressed visible distress. I have enacted safeguarding protocol after hearing Mr. Parker B.S. speak inappropriately." Camilla blinked. "I beg your pardon." Thomas stepped forward quickly, eager to reframe. "It's absurd, Mother." She was just startled. "I made a joke. Nothing inappropriate." The guard misunderstood. Rowan's posture didn't budge. He said to her, quote, "It won't hurt if you stay quiet." The corridor went still. Even the wardrobe assistant froze behind a fabric-draped rack. Camilla's expression faltered for half a second, just long enough for it to register before hardening into disbelief. "That is ridiculous. You must have misheard." "I didn't," Rowan said. Camilla stepped closer, now directly confronting him. "My son has every right to oversee ceremonial attire. I approved his access. If Charlotte misunderstood something, then it is a private matter to be handled between family, not by some overheated soldier shouting protocol like this is a battlefield." Rowan's face remained unreadable. The minor's reaction confirms the context: physical distress, behavioral freeze, recoil from contact. "I am obligated to act, Mom." Camilla's voice sharpened. "You're not a psychologist, you're a guard. Stand down." Rowan didn't blink. "Not until separation is enforced." Camilla turned to Charlotte then, voice shifting from authority to condescension. "Darling, you're making something out of nothing. Thomas meant no harm. You always get flustered in tight corridors." Charlotte's fingers gripped the velvet tighter. Thomas opened his mouth to speak. Rowan moved again, not a full step, just enough that his shadow touched both of them now. "No further contact, sir." Camilla raised her voice fully now. "You're out of line, Sergeant. This is not your call." But the look in Rowan's eyes wasn't defiant. It was lawful, final, like the law didn't belong to Camilla anymore. And for the first time, someone in the corridor behind her stepped back. Charlotte hadn't said a word since the whisper. She stood behind Sergeant Rowan Halberg, half shielded by the weight of his red uniform, her fingers still locked around the velvet cape sample. Her knuckles were pale, her shoulders drawn in tight, but her eyes hadn't left the floor. Camilla's voice had filled the corridor with its usual performance, dismissal, authority, control, but none of it touched Charlotte anymore. Then, without warning, her voice came through, small, brittle, like the sound of paper tearing in a cold room. He corners me in hallways. The words silenced everything. Camilla froze. Thomas's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Even the wardrobe assistant at the end of the corridor, who had been pretending to fold a cover sheet, dropped an entire stack of preserved gloves onto the stone. The sharp, leathery slap of them hitting the floor echoed louder than it should have. Charlotte didn't stop. When the lights are low, he waits. Her voice cracked, then steadied again. He tells me to stay quiet then, too. The sentence didn't scream, but it shattered. Camilla's reaction was immediate and terrifying in its precision. She turned on her heel and hissed at the assistant. "Pick that up and stop staring." Her tone betrayed her. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Fear that the moment had slipped, that the script wasn't being followed. Thomas stepped forward, both hands raised in a ridiculous mimicry of innocence. "Charlotte," he began, voice warm and rehearsed. "You know I would never." Rowan didn't wait. He stepped again, one pace, enough that Thomas's body jolted backward reflexively. The corridor was shrinking, and now the only one standing upright in it was the guard in red. Camilla snapped again, louder this time, desperate. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's nervous. She's in a fragile space, for God's sake. "She's not in a fragile space," Rowan interrupted flatly. "She's in a restricted access corridor being cornered by a man twice her size, and she just gave corroborative behavioral detail." Camilla's mouth fell open in stunned silence. Rowan turned to the preservation aide at the rear. "Trigger internal safeguarding beacon now." The aide nodded instantly, stepping toward the control panel. Camilla lunged forward, voice trembling. "You do not have authority to override my son's access." Rowan didn't even look at her. He adjusted his stance. Rifle slung tight, jaw locked. "I'm not overriding anything, Mom." He turned his head slightly. "I'm protecting a 10-year-old who just stopped whispering." And for the first time in her reign, Queen Camilla looked genuinely afraid. The alarm was silent, not the kind that blared through castle halls or summoned bells. No, it was worse than that. A silent code pulsed through Windsor's internal security network the moment the safeguarding panel was triggered. Within 60 seconds, every corridor camera refocused. Within 90, senior royal aides began moving. Catherine arrived in 2 minutes flat. No coat, no heels, no entourage. Just the Princess of Wales, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, walking into the restricted wardrobe wing with the kind of urgency that didn't announce itself with panic, but precision. She entered without a word. Her gaze swept the corridor in a single glance, processing everything. Charlotte, frozen beside a cabinet, gripping a velvet sample like a lifeline. Rowan standing between her and Thomas like a blockade of blood and red wool. Camilla caught mid-step with her mouth open, fury rising but directionless. Thomas rigid, posture half defensive, half entitled. Catherine didn't waste time. She went straight to her daughter and knelt. "Lottie," she said softly, gently placing a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Sweetheart, I'm here." Charlotte's head turned slowly like it took effort just to shift her neck. Her mouth opened, but no sound came at first. Catherine leaned closer. "Can you tell me what happened?" Charlotte's voice cracked, but it came. "He always finds me in small spaces." Catherine's breath hitched, but she didn't flinch. Charlotte went on, eyes still wide. "When no one's around, he comes into the wardrobe halls or the side corridors. He says to be a good girl and stay quiet." The words weren't loud, but they were shaped like a verdict. Catherine's hand didn't move. She didn't wrap Charlotte in her arms, didn't cry, didn't shout. She stood slowly, controlled, and turned to Thomas. "You said that to my daughter." Thomas's expression contorted somewhere between panic and performance. "Catherine, come on. She's 10. She's always had a dramatic streak. This is being blown out of." Catherine took a step forward, cutting the space in half. "Don't speak to me." Thomas froze. Catherine's voice never rose, but it tightened into something far more lethal. "You followed a child into a preservation corridor. You whispered to her. You made her afraid to speak. And when a guard intervened, you tried to laugh it off." Thomas's jaw clenched. "She's twisting this." "She's 10, Catherine snapped. "She doesn't have the power to twist anything." She took another step. Now Rowan stood shoulder to shoulder with her. Camilla tried to interject. "Catherine," he was only but the Princess of Wales didn't even glance her way, because for the first time in this castle's long, silent history, the wrong person had been heard, and the right one had finally spoken. He didn't arrive with a shout. He arrived with footfalls, measured, steady, echoing down the marble corridor, like the countdown to something irreversible. Prince William entered the wardrobe wing, flanked by a single aide, no guard detail, no press staff. He moved past the preservation markers without hesitation. The security system had already been overridden by the safeguarding trigger. He was now in control of the corridor by definition, not declaration. Every head turned. Even Camilla took a step back without realizing it. William's eyes swept the room once, just once. Charlotte, still pressed against the archival cabinet, visibly trembling. Catherine standing directly between her daughter and Camilla. Rowan Halberg body blocking Thomas with military precision. Thomas, arms stiff, back tight, face pale. Camilla, frozen mid-lair, but saying nothing now. William spoke only once before the power shifted forever. "Sergeant Halberg," he said evenly, "report." Rowan didn't hesitate. "Your Royal Highness, Mr. Parker B.S. entered a restricted preservation zone without authorization, approached a minor, whispered a phrase containing coercive language verbatim. "It won't hurt if you stay quiet." Princess Charlotte displayed visible physical distress. Verbal disclosure followed. Protocol Echo 2 was activated per safeguarding law. Subject has remained within arm's length of the minor until separation was enforced. Not a word of it was emotional. Every word was a nail. William nodded once, then turned to his daughter. "Lottie," his voice softened just for her, "do you feel afraid?" Charlotte nodded slowly. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just the kind of nod that closes the book on pretending. William turned back to Rowan. "Subject is to be removed from this wing immediately. He is not to leave castle grounds. No access to royal quarters. Escort him to the administrative suite until the safeguarding officer arrives." Camilla exploded. "William, this is madness. You're separating family over an interpretation." William didn't even glance at her. He addressed Rowan again. "Ensure no contact is made with the minor. Escort includes 2 officers. No deviation." Camilla's voice cracked. "You're overstepping. You are punishing my son for a sentence." William turned finally, only halfway, and his voice lowered. "She said he finds her in small spaces and tells her to stay quiet. That sentence there is enough." Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came because something else had shifted. Not just protocol, not just posture, but gravity. Everyone in the corridor knew Camilla had lost control of the room, and the guard had never needed permission to do what was right. The sound of approaching boots on stone wasn't loud, but in the silence that had swallowed the preservation wing, it felt seismic. 2 royal security officers appeared at the corridor's far end, walking in tandem with calculated restraint. No weapons drawn, no shouting, just two men in black coats with comms at the shoulder and orders in hand. Thomas saw them before anyone else did. His jaw tensed, his shoulders rolled back in subtle protest. "I don't think this is necessary," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "William, come on, we're family." William didn't respond. He didn't need to. The officers stopped precisely 6 FT from Thomas and waited. No cuffs, no restraint, just silence and expectation. Thomas turned toward his mother, searching her face for the outrage that had always protected him. But Camilla didn't move. Not toward him, not toward Charlotte. She just stood there, rigid, breathing shallow, facing a line she could no longer cross. Charlotte watched the scene unfold from behind Catherine. Her hands were still curled around the velvet fabric, though her posture had softened slightly. The fear hadn't vanished, but something else was forming in its place, something steadier. Thomas took a step back. "I didn't do anything criminal," he muttered. "This is optics hysteria. She's just, you will not speak to her again," William said quietly. Thomas looked up sharply. "You're seriously?" William's eyes didn't flicker. "You're done here." Officers stepped forward in unison. Thomas turned, half expecting someone, anyone, to intervene, but no one moved. Not the aides, not the preservation staff, not even Camilla. Charlotte exhaled for the first time in minutes. As Thomas was escorted out of the corridor, his steps echoing down the marble floor, Camilla finally reacted. She tried to step forward toward her granddaughter, but Catherine shifted instantly, her body sliding like a drawn gate between them. "No," she said. Camilla froze. Catherine didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She just spoke with the weight of a mother who had waited too long to hear the truth. "You don't speak to her today." Camilla's face went pale. Her hand dropped slightly, as if she'd forgotten it was still holding her gloves. Rowan didn't move. But the line between them, between the guard and the woman who once commanded every room she entered, had hardened, and this time no title would cross it. The corridor emptied slowly, not like a room dispersing after an event, but like a body exhaling after a trauma. One aide left with a clipboard clutched too tightly. Another lingered near the preservation lockbox before retreating quietly. Even Camilla walked away without another word, her heels fading down the far corridor as if the stone floor itself no longer welcomed her. Only 3 figures remained. Princess Charlotte sat on a low, padded bench near the wall, wrapped not in her mother's arms, but in a preservation cloth, gently draped across her shoulders by the wardrobe assistant. The velvet cape she'd been holding all along now rested in her lap, folded, neat, untouched since the moment Thomas had arrived. Catherine stood nearby, not over her, not hovering, just present, watching, protecting, silent, and Sergeant Rowan Halberg resumed his post at the mouth of the corridor. He hadn't been ordered to stay. He hadn't needed to be. He stood just as he had before the first echo of footsteps ever reached his ears, tall. Composed, hands clasped over the white belt, the tall black bearskin hat of the Royal Guard casting a shadow over the seam in the marble tile. Only now everything was different. Charlotte looked up. Slowly, the corridor lighting caught her eyes just right. No tears, no panic, just the settled awareness of a child who had risked everything by speaking and had not been silenced. She rose to her feet, small slippers touched down on cold stone. She walked toward Rowan carefully, quietly, and stopped just in front of him. The preservation cloth slipped slightly from her shoulder, but she didn't fix it. She looked up at the man who had stepped in when no one else had. "You heard him." She said it wasn't a question. Rowan nodded once. "I did, Mom." "You didn't pretend you didn't," she added. "No, Mom." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just reached out and lightly touched the edge of his tunic sleeve, 2 fingers resting for half a second on the scarlet wool. Thank you for not waiting, she whispered. Then she turned and walked back to her mother, the hem of the preservation cloth trailing slightly behind her like a cape. Catherine rested her hand on Charlotte's back. They walked away together out of the corridor into the main hall without a word. Rowan remained still. Outside the chamber, the sound of preservation units resumed, low, mechanical, constant, but it wasn't the same silence anymore. It was protected. Do you think the royal guard was right to override Camilla in front of everyone? Should Thomas have been escorted out of the castle on the spot? And if you heard those exact words whispered to a child, would you have stepped in? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. Tap like, hit subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss a royal guard story. Share this video with someone who still thinks silence protects power. And while you're here, check out one of the videos now on your screen. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new